Well, I was once arrested in Yemen, and I do have myself to blame. I kind of crossed the border illegally.
Welcome to a new episode of Most Memorable Journeys. Another fascinating guest today. And it's funny how I find these people. I really don't know, but you see, when the universe knows what you're looking for, it serves you the people, and they just turn up on my laptop and I find them. And this one today is quite special because I live in Cyprus. He has a Greek name. So, of course, I immediately noticed Mitsidis. I thought, who on earth is that? And then I started reading. And then I read that he is the world's most traveled person. And he has actually been to all the 193 countries that are recognized by the United Nations. And not so many people have done that. But then I also subscribed to his website. He is the founder of Nomad Mania. And that's a place where you can spend a week on until you have seen everything. So let's find out more. Welcome to Most Memorable Journeys, Mitsidis.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Really, I'm looking forward to this.
So am I. And let's just start right away. Where does Mitsidis come from? Because the Greek name is, it's obvious you are somehow of Greek origin.
Well, I'm more than just of Greek origin. I actually grew up in Athens. So yeah, I'm half Greek. My father was born in Athens before the Second World War. He is of Pontiac origin. So his parents were from Samsunda, currently Samsun. So that half is accounted for. The other half is a bit more complicated. My mother was born in Cape Town in South Africa, and she is of Polish background. And I was born in London, and I currently live in the UK. I consider myself entirely bilingual, although I think English is my first language. I use it much more nowadays. So I don't know, where do I come from? Planet Earth is the best answer.
I think that is the best, should be the best answer for all of us, because if we all came from planet Earth, we would have a lot less problems with each other. You know, there would be a lot less, maybe less greed and less racism, but that's another story. Maybe we'll get to that later on. But my question is usually my first question that I ask the people: when were you on a plane for the first time, and do you remember?
Well, I don't remember it because it was when I was 40 days old. So I was born in the UK in February 1972 on Valentine's Day. And according to what my mother has told me, we flew to Athens on April 4th of the same year. So yeah, 40 days. And obviously I have no recollection of that one, but yeah.
Was it the 40 days, like in the Greeks or here in Cyprus as well, people wait 40 days until they actually allow the children to go outside. So was it your first outing to go to the airport?
I'm not sure that my mother really planned it that way. I think it's just how it happened, really.
That's funny, very funny, because it is a thing. It still is. There's some people don't take their kids outside until they're 40 days old.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that I got many walks in Regent's Park and stuff before I was 40 days old. So, in the little pram and stuff. But yeah, by the time I was 40 days old, I had already visited my second country, which was Greece. So, I suppose that set the tone for what was to follow.
I'm from Switzerland. My kids were born here in Cyprus, and they were a little older, but their first trip obviously was to go to Switzerland and meet the other side of the family. That's what people like us do. We go and introduce our kids to the other side.
Indeed, yes.
So then you grew up in the UK. You went to school in the UK.
I grew up in Athens. My whole childhood, and in fact, my first degree was in Athens. But obviously, there was a lot of travel involved. Not only to the UK, where my grandparents were, but also because I would say my parents were avid travelers. Now, in the 70s and early 80s, obviously travel was not what it is today, but for their means and for the time, I think we did quite a few trips. So I very clearly remember a trip to Spain when I was 5, then another trip to Italy when I was 6. We didn't go that far. But anyway, I was based in Athens until I was 21. Yeah.
Okay, that's quite significant. Actually, growing up in Greece, recollection of your teenage years would be in Greece, would be in Athens.
Yeah. Well, I think what has happened with me is that I would definitely say that in the first half of my life, I was Greek, and I think the international part was not really very pronounced. But then later on, when I started traveling, and then, of course, when I did move away, I think the more international / British part, came to the surface. So, now, obviously, I'm very proud to be half Greek. And when I'm in Greece, I fit in and I have friends there. But I think I hesitate to say I'm Greek now because I don't think my character and personality really match the stereotype of what Greek is,
Yeah. Even though I think that's another thing that is really changing in the world, isn't it? The stereotypes are changing. We are becoming a melting, every place is becoming a melting pot, really. People's mentalities are changing. And I think it's still, being Greek is still very beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, really? It is. I wish I were more Greek. I wish I were less well organized, to be honest, because I think I'm really very, very organized, and that makes me, an outlier in Greece. I do wish I were more spontaneous, perhaps sometimes, and I am rather introverted. So, none of that really goes with our idea of what Greeks are. But
but I think being organized is a good thing. And I think having traveled to 193 countries is quite extroverted, if you ask me. How did it start?
How you do it,
When did you actually realize that you were doing what you're doing? Because you're not a country counter. It's not like you started traveling and thinking, I'm going to visit every country in the world.
No, well, not initially, obviously. As I said, I had done quite a few countries at a younger age with my parents. Then, when I was a student, I did some more, but obviously there was no conscious plan there. I don't think there's a moment when you say, now I'm going to do them all. I think you start, at one point, I remember I looked at the map of Europe and I thought, geez, I only have about 8 countries in Europe I hadn't visited. So I thought, well, why don't I do them all? That was manageable and easy. And I did, and then I thought, well, Uzbekistan sounds really interesting. And this was 2001. Not many people had even heard of those places then. And, I found myself at around 90 or 100 countries. And I had always wanted to visit Afghanistan ever since I was a child. I had some fascination with that. So as soon as I could, I did. And Afghanistan was dangerous. It was a no-go zone. And I went there. And I think when I did, then I thought, you know what? I've come to such a difficult place. I'm already halfway through all the countries in the world. So at this point, yes, I am going to aim for them all. So I think I was about 30 or 31 then. And it took me 5 years and I was done. I admit I did them way too fast. And I feel guilty about that, which is why I founded Nomad Made.
You can always go back, can't you? And funny enough, I've actually been to Afghanistan as well.
Wow. Well, what did you think of it?
Because I was a tour guide for 11 years and I did a trekking tour, which was North Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I thought it was just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, it's marvelous. For me, people often ask me this question, what is your favorite country? And I really don't like answering that because it sort of obliterates all the ones not mentioned. And every country is beautiful in its own way. But I will say that Afghanistan is sort of really mystical, magical. It's like completely out of this world. It's really sad that it's so dangerous. And well, I'm not sure it's that dangerous now, to be honest, but that it's been off the radar for more than 40 years, because I would say that of all the places I've been to, the mix of people there is unique. You could be blonde and you could be Asian looking and you're Afghan, and that is amazing.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful example of being able to coexist, really.
Well, are they able? I mean,
not anymore. I mean,
all their troubles, I mean,
yes, unfortunately. But you see, this is something that I like to talk to people about, because traveling, first of all, I believe that traveling makes you humble, because it shows you how little you are, how big the world is, and how unimportant we are. And I think the other thing also is traveling makes you understand people. It helps, and I read somewhere that you also speak a few languages. I think you do.
I destroy a few languages. Yeah. Well, I'm only fluent in English and Greek, and I would say I'm near fluent in Serbian. But apart from that, I speak a few, but I wouldn't say I'm fluent. But yeah, I think language is an essential part of exploring. You get so much more when you can communicate with the people. And I think that is why I really enjoy traveling in Latin America, because I can really get by in Spanish. And I love talking to, a Peruvian taxi driver. You just learn so much about life when you share 20 minutes talking about everything with that kind of person with whom otherwise you have nothing in common. But somehow you find things in common with all these unlikely people on the road. And you do need languages for that.
Yeah. And I also think that you actually realize that you have a lot more in common than you thought you did when you start speaking to somebody, because one thing that we all have in common is, our need for freedom, our need for peace, our need for safety.
For happiness, I would say.
For happiness, yes.
We all just want to be happy, and no, you're very right. I've had some nice conversations with Pakistani tuk-tuk drivers, and luckily they do speak a little bit of English, so one can get the message across. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing how after those conversations, I feel elated. I feel so happy. I feel like I've approached a person with whom seemingly, our lives are completely different. And yet we've managed to communicate. And then often I wonder, why can't I communicate with the neighbors in that way, But there you go.
Yeah. And do you believe, people now with the internet, people organize everything in advance. They already know where they're going to eat on the second day of their stay when they go to a country. What do you think about that? Because in the old days, we used to just buy a flight ticket and arrive somewhere, maybe have a couple of nights in a hotel, and then we took it as it came. But
yeah. Well, first of all, I don't like judging how people travel. I think first of all, travel is great. And I even don't judge people who don't like it. I mean, everyone should live their life the way they choose and the way they want. So if someone wants to plan every single moment of their holiday, good for them, I mean, and most people, let's face it, travel because they need to rest. They have a very difficult life at home. And I completely respect that. Now, for people like myself, planning is a different thing. I mean, I do usually plan the outline of my trips. I know when I'm arriving and when I'm leaving, more or less. But in terms of where exactly I'm going to go, definitely, I have no idea where I'm going to eat. And quite often, I have no idea where I'm going to sleep. I think in that, I have learned to be extremely flexible. And anything goes, I could sleep on the floor or I could sleep at a 5-star, I'm happy with whatever comes up, it's all right. Yeah.
During all your trips, have you ever felt really unsafe? Have you ever come across a situation where you thought, now I'm in danger or I'm in trouble?
Well, I'm relatively cautious as a person, which means that if I'm going to a place I suspect will be dangerous, I take my precautions. So I wouldn't walk in the middle of a slum at night, that kind of thing. Well, I was once arrested in Yemen, and I do have myself to blame. I kind of crossed the border illegally. So, I mean,
I don't like that.
I knew what I was doing and I got what I deserved. I'm not sure I felt unsafe because I was detained by the so-called good guys. I mean, they were representing the government, whatever that means in Yemen. But I have to say, I felt very afraid because you don't really know who you're dealing with, what they'll do with you. I mean, they could have kept me in a dungeon for weeks if they wanted to. So, there were a few hours there where I felt very insecure. Unsafe? I don't think so. I think partially I'm also very accustomed to, I wouldn't say to danger, but when you travel to every country in the world, you don't expect the level of safety on anything to be like, what it is in Europe or in the countries that we're more familiar with. So I think my standards have gotten so low that I no longer even observe dangers if they're all around me, So maybe I'm just oblivious to it. But I think that's the only attitude you can have if you really want to go for a walk in the middle of Lagos, Otherwise, if you're afraid, then you just won't do it, and then that's the end of it.
Yeah, but I also believe that when you behave like respectfully, if you just adjust to the situation, to the place you are, I never really felt unsafe myself. It's respect. It's all about respect. It's respecting people, respecting customs.
I completely agree. And I mean, it's also the attitude. I mean, I always underdress anyway. I never appear as someone who could be a target for robbery. But it's also, you need to smile and if you do sense that the situation is dangerous, you can try to find sort of local people who you think have a friendly demeanor and approach them and whatever. I've never had to do that, but in the back of my mind, I always think, okay, that person there sitting outside his little shop looks like someone I could go to if things do get, difficult. So, yeah, that's the way to do it. I think being open usually means that you'll be fine.
Yeah, that is true. And I worked for quite a few years as an interpreter at the police. And I have translated for foreign people who have been arrested. And I think one very, very important thing is when you have to do with the authorities is to not be arrogant, to be kind of, to show that
Respect.
You are. Yes.
Yeah. I think arrogance is one of the problems that some travelers have. Well, travelers come in all shapes and sizes. And on Nomad Mania, we have such a large spectrum of people, from some super rich billionaires to, the ultimate backpacker, because when you have an online community with 20,000 members, you're going to get everything. And I think some of the people do travel with preconceived ideas and not really able to get their own culture out of their skin when they're traveling somewhere else, But if you're going to a place like Saudi Arabia, you cannot start championing women's rights. And, it's just not what you, if that's what you want to do, then better don't even go. You need to accept that the world is varied. People do have very different opinions and ideas of what is right. And, what is right for me may not be right for someone in Laos, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, that is so true. But that goes back to respect again, doesn't it? It goes back to respecting other people's way of life. And who says that mine is right? Whose is right anyway? I think we're all just human and here for a short while trying to do our best.
No, and I mean, if you look at it from a happiness point of view, I would argue that the poorer the person, the happier they are often, based on what I've seen in Africa and just the joy. I mean, assuming that the people do have the basics to live with, but, the joy that you often see in a nondescript African village is usually much bigger than what you find in European cities. So, that then makes you think, well, what is happiness ultimately? And, if progress or success is to be someone like me or someone Western, for example, then is that really it? Or maybe this is a better path to happiness. So I do think traveling is partially a way of philosophizing and understanding deep existential questions and observing them and trying to reach your own conclusion.
Absolutely, absolutely, and respecting other people's conclusions. Let's talk a little bit about nomad mania, because that's how I found you. I don't know if I found you first and then nomad mania or the other way around, but I obviously set up an account. I still have a lot to fill out, but every country can be split up in parts because some countries are really, really big.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, yes, as you said, when I finished every country, I found myself in a little bit of a situation where it was like a letdown. I thought, okay, I've done it. And what now? What will my travel aims be now? I am a person who always needs to have a sort of aim or an end result rather than going with the flow completely. So then I thought, wait a minute, the world is huge. Countries come in all shapes and sizes. You can't say you've been to the States if you've only been to New York. Right. I mean, clearly there's much more there. And I mean, even if you look at smaller countries, let's take Greece. I mean, have you really been to Greece if you've only seen Athens or if you've only seen Mykonos for that matter? So, along with a couple of other travelers, because I'm definitely not taking sole credit for that, we spent quite a long time trying to create a rational system of dividing the world. And by rational, I mean looking at some objective measures and coming up with a kind of algorithm of how many pieces the world should have. And I mean, there's no perfect science here. We figured out that a good number would be around 1,200 because that is challenging enough, but it's not unmanageable. It's not 10,000 where you get completely lost and don't know what comes next. So given that ballpark number, we looked at a country's size, its population, its economic strength in the world, international tourist arrivals, which kind of looks at international appeal. And also we looked at cultural diversity. So that works well for African countries, which have a tribal background and there's many different peoples. And sort of we crunched numbers into that and came up with a sort of optimal number of divisions per country. And that's how we have now come up with a final division into 1,301 regions, as we call them. And again, I mean, people sometimes argue, oh, you should change this. That's not the way to do it. But this is, I mean, there can't be a perfect science here. We've done the best we can. Some countries are very quirky. You have a country like Micronesia, which is extremely small in territory, but it's composed of 4 different island groupings, which are miles apart. So even though Micronesia is tiny, we've given it these 4 regions because it just makes sense. Then you have huge countries, obviously, where we cannot divide them into endless regions because it would just be too many. But anyway, that's the general philosophy, and it's a challenge. And obviously, nobody that we know of has done every part. But some people are getting there, and that's the game, if you want. But that's definitely not the only thing nomad mania is.
Yeah, I think it's the game of, on the one hand, doing this, but also enjoying it. Because if you are just doing it to count, then it's no fun. As I said before.
Yeah. I completely agree. And again, there are a couple of people that I know that really seem to be doing it just to do it. I mean, again, I don't want to judge them. Everyone has their own motivations, but for me, travel always has to be fun. And yeah, there are a few countries which are more demanding and where you feel, oh God, I'm going to go into 45 degrees. And, that's not fun on its own. But ultimately, the end result should be that you're enjoying yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for whoever is listening, I think this is definitely worth having a look at, that website, Nomad Mania, because it's fun. It's fun. And I'm going to spend some more time on it soon because I've been quite busy lately. But coming back to something else, the reason why I started my podcast is because during COVID, I'm a traveler. I haven't been to every country, but I've been to many. And I feel like I really, really need to, especially leave my island regularly. And during COVID, I felt like I was missing a limb. So I thought, if I cannot travel, at least I can talk about it. And I started Most Memorable Journeys. And I did get a couple of trips in. I did manage to go to Switzerland. And but you were telling me that you managed to get a little more than I did.
I did. Well, okay. Well, first of all, I do want to say that as bad as COVID was, I think there were a few silver linings there. And I mean, here, your podcast is one of them, and then a couple of other travelers I know actually wrote books during COVID, which they would have probably never done. So, one always has to try to find if there is any good side of something. Yes, I did travel quite a lot during COVID, even in the very first dark days. And I think that's simply because I would die if I didn't. I don't want this to sound exaggerated, but literally, I spent 35 days in lockdown, and every day I felt I was dying. Literally, I couldn't breathe. And I remember I would spend each day, I would spend hours on flight radar looking at the planes going, and they were almost all cargo flights because commercial flights had stalled. But, every plane that was going represented freedom. I'm like, okay, that is still flying, So I found it extremely hard to be contained and indoors. It was truly the worst challenge I've had to deal with. And then one of my friends is from Sweden. He's also a big traveler, and he's a doctor. So that was a very good coincidence. So I corresponded extensively with him and asked him, to what extent, if I came to Sweden, which was the only open country at the time, what risks were there? How was the situation? And he kind of told me, what, things are really not that bad. Just come, don't think of it too much. And I did. I had to fly from London via Helsinki because there were no direct flights. But luckily, there were those few flights. And I spent 10 days in Sweden in April 2022, when the whole of the rest of the world was locked down. And, those days, that scene in Titanic where he's like, I'm the king of the world, well, that's exactly how I felt when I landed in Stockholm, and then I rented the car. And basically for 10 days, I was on my own with my car. There was very little, if any, interaction with people, but hotels were open and restaurants were open. And I think I drove about 5,000 kilometers, and that was just the affirmation of freedom. And I'm pretty sure I didn't cause anybody any danger, and I do think one needs to travel responsibly. One always needs to think of the consequences of that. I do remember I made a very rare, I don't really post much on Facebook, but at the time I did. And I got a lot of backlash. People were saying, what are you doing? This is completely irresponsible. And I was like, well, how is it irresponsible when it's literally me in a car? Okay, I check into the hotel mostly remotely. And, if the Swedish government thinks it's safe for a receptionist to be there, then, they judge it safe. So I don't think I'm putting anyone in any danger. So, that was my first COVID trip. And then by that summer, some other countries had opened, and I did go back to Greece and a few other trips. I went to Hungary. And then by the end of the summer of 2020, more and more countries were opening. And then it became a bit of a game of seeing which one is open, where can you go now? But, it was much more easy to maneuver and find places to go. So I was on the road, I would say most of the time as usual, only that it wasn't exotic trips. It was more within Europe, I would say.
Good for you, because I post everything on Facebook, and I was also judged because I traveled from Cyprus to Buenos Aires on the 11th of March, 2020.
Oh, wow. So you were stuck there?
3 days, no, 3 days after I arrived, I heard that the country was going to close down like in 2 or 3 days. So I had to escape. I actually managed to get to Switzerland first. I managed to get a flight. It was a big drama. I got a flight to Switzerland. But while I was flying to Switzerland, I also found out that Cyprus had introduced a 2 weeks quarantine. Oh. So actually, I was one of the first people who spent 2 weeks in a hotel here upon arrival. But it was 2 good weeks of my life because nobody bothered me. I had time to think about my life. It was a beautiful Aldiana resort on the beach near Larnaca. I had a balcony. It was good weather because it was beginning of April. Could have, life could be worse.
Well, those are the silver linings.
Yeah.
Having said that, we in the travel community, we did lose a few people to COVID, and that was really sad. And in fact, we lost one guy with whom we had traveled a few weeks before, and I noticed he wasn't wearing his mask properly. And I told him off, wear that mask. And yeah. I mean, one mustn't forget that. And hopefully we've learned a lesson and next time we'll be better prepared, because it's not a question of if, it looks like it's just a question of when.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you mentioned judging a few times, and it's so unnecessary to judge. People in Asia have been wearing masks for years, way before we started doing that, because they were protecting each other. When you had a cold as an Asian person, you wear a mask so you don't pass it on to somebody else. It's got to do with respect again.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was very recently in Asia. I just came back actually, and yeah, it was a bit odd getting those masks out again because I haven't been using one much this year. But then, let's say in Japan, I mean everyone wears a mask, and obviously you will too. And yeah, that seems to work fine.
Yeah, but as you were saying, I mean, obviously, what we are talking about here, of course, none of us was, no intention was to put anybody ever in danger. We were just living our lives and being a little weird about traveling. We needed a little more. And whoever wanted to stay home or still wants to stay home, I respect those people. If they are not ready to face the world, it's totally fine.
Well, I do really think that in general in life, making rules that apply to everyone is futile, because people are just not the same. Everyone is different. I mean, in terms of age, in terms of abilities, in terms of interest, we are all different. And so, okay, obviously there's some universal laws like, don't kill people or whatever. But from there on, a rule like don't leave your house, to me, just seems, completely out of order, So obviously, I do think one needs to consider individual circumstances before looking at what the best outcome could be.
Yeah, but you do agree with me that traveling and, sometimes leaving this famous comfort zone is important. Like the comfort zone is the place where our dreams go to die. It really is important to leave and try something once in a while.
Yeah, and yet, Elizabeth, most people don't leave their comfort zone. I mean, I think it's very easy when you're surrounded by people like you and by other travelers to think that, yeah, this is normal. This is, quote unquote normal. Well, this is how most people are. But where I live, so I live in a kind of sort of semi-rural Kent. When I walk around, I mean, I bet most people have never been abroad, or if they have, it's to Benidorm, and that's it. I don't think they ever think about leaving their comfort zone at all. And even if they do go to Benidorm, that is their comfort zone. It's just more people like them and a slightly different setting. So I think it's important to remember that we as travelers are actually still the minority. And obviously, then you have the other half of the world or more who are people who don't have the ability to travel because they're from countries which are poor and obviously they have much more pressing things to solve than seeing the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are very, very privileged and very blessed and should be realizing that and be grateful for it every day. The fact that we can go and, it's all about, it's a personal decision how you want to live and what you want to do. And so asking you, what is your next move? What is on Harry Mitsidis travel menu?
Ooh, lots. Well, to be honest, even though I said I did travel a lot during COVID, it still wasn't necessarily the trips I would have had without COVID. So now that that's sort of behind us, now I'm coming back to the real to traveling. My next trip is to Sierra Leone. I'm off on Sunday, hopefully. And I'm going to have a bit of an African trip just before Christmas. And then in January, I'm planning a trip to India, where I was last in 2017. So, it's time to go back. Then in early March, we have a Nomad Mania gathering, what we call a conference in Panama, in Bocas del Toro, which is one of the nice archipelagos there. So there's going to be 30 of us there. And obviously, as part of that, I'm going to do a bit of Central and South America. In April, I plan to go back to the Pacific and visit Tuvalu and Tonga for the second time, because one of my aims is to visit every country at least twice. And I'm only 6 countries off that. So I'm hoping that in 2023, I will achieve that. So having visited every independent country at least twice. But, if I don't, then it's not that I'm rushing. It's just that then there'll be a different aim. There's always, the bar always needs to be set higher. So
that is definitely true. Amazing. And, that's definitely a small problem to have, that you're only 6 countries behind visiting everyone.
I am very, very conscious that these are first world problems. I do try to ground myself, when I read the news of what's going on in the world. It's this is my way of, in a way, poking fun at life. Even these aims, they are almost ridiculous, and I'm completely aware of that. I studied sociology, so perhaps more than most, I am very aware of the planet and politics and all of that. It's something that really interests me. So It's not as if I'm oblivious to that at all.
No, but I think by traveling and connecting the world and understanding and showing respect to other people, you do your part for the world. Not, we can all participate and contribute by just being kind. And kindness has no borders, and it has no color and nothing. So you're not doing anything wrong at all.
That's so nice to hear, Elizabeth. This is exactly my philosophy, be kind. And I think my proof of that was actually in Sierra Leone, where I'm going. So the first time I was in Sierra Leone, I learned the value of $1 because I was traveling in the middle of nowhere, and there was a river we needed to cross. So we were waiting for the barge, and on our side there was this village, and these people came around to look at this white guy, because obviously that didn't happen every day. And then I decided, what, I'm going to give these people $1, because that's all I had really. And the joy they all just burst into dance and cheers, and it was like this massive positivity. And I thought, it's not every day that you realize that $1 can bring that much happiness to that many people. But this is also such a positive message in a way. It's not about the money. It's about how people can be happy easily with very little, really. Just show them a bit of affection if you want. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful end to this conversation. And I think being happy yourself because you do travel, and I definitely am very happy when I travel, helps you spread happiness. And that's what the world needs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, especially now, the world needs happiness. Yeah. And I think when you're relatively privileged, then you have no excuse, then you need to become this vessel of positivity for other people. So, I do have my dark side, and obviously we all do, but I do try to do that, especially when I'm traveling, be as good a person as I can. And always remember that despite our seeming differences, this is what we all want. We all just want to be happy. This is global. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on Most Memorable Journeys, Harry Mitsidis.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoy my podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. You will find all the information in the show notes.